So the second part of this conversation that I did want to spend some time on that I think is really important and maybe gets a little missed in his article. Deep reading and deep literacy, I think, is really, really important to understand complexity, to understand nuance. There is an assumption, however, that in the article, in my opinion, that those things will lead to moral rectitude and to a moral rightness. That simply making people or helping people become deep readers will therefore help them become better people. And I think that is not true. I do believe that we have a chronic problem of illiteracy in a deep literacy way, but I do not believe that simply being a deep reader or having some version of deep literacy allows you to that the natural consequence is that you see the world correctly. I think you can think about the world in a more complex way, which is important, but it does not mean, in my opinion, that you therefore then see the world correctly. And what do you think about that?
I think that there you go. From the 60s on, the idea of a correct world disappeared.
Yeah.
There is no correct. There is no wrong. There is no right. And I tell you, it turns into mush. We are producing mush. Our children's, the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a great poem for a reason, because there are goals and there are heroes and there are villains and they are seeking and needing and wanting. There are the villains who need to be taken out. There are the heroes who need to have fate behind them. We don't have that. We have anti-heroes. It's why we're all in love with those superheroes, because we're so desperate for somebody to save somebody. Anybody. I'm just saying.
You said it. You definitely said it. I do think there is something to that. I think that there is, I think there's something spiritual about it, of us reaching out to true heroes and responding to true heroism. A lot of people give me a hard time because I have a tendency to love or like a little bit more films or stories where characters die. And I know that might sound a little macabre, might sound a little dark, but the stories that I do tend to gravitate toward are stories of true sacrifice. Stories where heroes are genuinely heroes, where they give of themselves, they give even of their lives for the betterment of somebody else. That is Ayn Rand would say otherwise, but I think that whole idea is a morally praiseworthy thing. That we can be unselfish, we can think of others, we can give of ourselves.
Even in the realm of romance, I've had this discussion many times. I picked up the book Twilight and I brought it home, and I kept reading it thinking, has she sold her soul to the devil? Because I can't put this book down. But I realized after reading it that it was really about heroes, and the fact that the character in that book is so concerned for another human being that his will, he subjugates himself for her goodwill, and women went nuts over it. Why? Because it's true love, and true love is real, and those things are not gone.
And I think one of the purposes of fiction, is to remind us of that.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
To remind us.
It should be the purpose of fiction.
Sure.
Instead of instead of mush, instead of just life is mush and then we die.
This is not to say that everything needs to be sweet and sweet and salty,
that's not what we're saying.
And all that sort of saccharine. Is that the right word?
Saccharine. Yes, saccharine, very good.
That stories can be hard. That you can tell hard stories with difficult, complex situations.
Yes.
And yet feed the soul.
Yes.
And I think there's much less feeding of the soul, especially in fiction writing, at least from my experience. So again, this deep literacy idea I think is so important, but it's only part of the story. I think it is mistaken to believe that our political agency, as the author talks about it, and our political freedom rests disproportionately upon this idea of deep literacy. Do I think it's important? Yes, absolutely. Do I think our society is missing something? Oh, desperately, okay? Desperately. Do I think it will solve the problem? I do not. I think that there has to be a moral undercurrent, a moral overcurrent, a moral something
anything
that can guide, that can lead, that can teach us what is right and what is wrong. And deep literacy and deep reading can only get us part of the way there.
And yes, because I think the problem isn't superficial. I think the problem is speaking of deep, I think the problem itself is deep. And I think that it is a multi-decade erosion of something that we once understood collectively. And again, on moral fiction, John Gardner, can't say enough about this book. He talks about art and the purpose of art. He says art builds. It never stands pat. It destroys only evil. If art destroys good, mistaking it for evil, then that art is false, an error. It requires denunciation. This, I have claimed, is what true art is about. Preservation of the world, of gods and men.
And and it's a great quote. It's a great book. Recommend on moral fiction by John Gardner. And listen, if you read some of his fiction books, if you read Grindel and if you read Freddie's book, they're not light afternoons, lazy on the couch kind of books. Those are tough books and they're dark books. But I think they are.
But they're unforgettable.
But they do fulfill a purpose that Mr. Gardner is suggesting here. So this was a great conversation, and this was a little bit longer. But we really appreciate you all watching and love to hear your thoughts on all of this. So thanks for coming by. Thank you all.
Bye.